Hi everybody, it's Lisa here from ProWritingAid. Those of you who have been here before will probably already have realized that I am not Hayley Milliman. She is the brilliant writer and teacher who usually hosts these write-ins for us, but she's had something really important come up tonight, and so she's not able to be with us. And she was incredibly disappointed, especially since tonight's topic is world building, and she has literally just launched her new book, which is all about world building. So Libby, do you want to drop the link to Hayley's new book in the chat, just in case anybody wants to grab it? There's just a free link there for a free download if anybody wants to grab it. It's kind of amazing. So Hayley's not here, so you're stuck with me, I'm afraid. But I usually come along to these write-ins anyway because they're really fun and because I always learn something new or write something useful. So hopefully I can manage tonight's session without her. I hope you'll bear with me. I'd also like to introduce you to Libby. She's the newest member of the ProWritingAid editorial staff. Oh, there she is. Hi, Libby.
Hello.
She's just out of university and she's already become completely indispensable to our team. So she's going to be hanging around and helping me read all of your writing that you do tonight. Before we begin, Libby's going to drop a couple more links so that you can make sure you don't miss out on any upcoming events.
I'm just getting
the link to all of our upcoming webinars. There's a link to sign up for the ProWritingAid newsletter, which is where we announce all of our new sessions. You can also sign up for a free ProWritingAid account there. And I just wanted to let you know that on Thursday, I'm going to be back. I've got an interview that's going to be happening with Jerry Jenkins, who has been on the New York Times bestseller list 21 times and has written something stupid like 200 books. So he's just coming along and we don't even have any specific topics in mind. He's just here for your questions. So come with all your questions. Let's put him on the spot and figure out how he has somehow written 200 books. So just a couple more reminders before we dive in case there's anybody new. You can work on something completely new tonight, start from scratch, or you can work on something that you've started before. You can write it on your computer, or you can write it in a notebook, or you can write it on a napkin. If you want to share it at the end, that would be great. You're welcome to share it in the chat box and then everybody can see it and comment on it and say, you know, what they think is interesting about what you've done. And if you want to just keep it to yourself, then that's fine too. There's a little bit of something for everybody. So the first thing that Hayley talks about one of the things that she talks about in her book is the world building technique, which is called the rule of three. And I'm sure you've come across this, even if you haven't had a name for it up until now. And so what authors often do is they'll take something that everyone is already familiar with and they'll change three significant things about it so that it's still familiar to your readers, but so they can imagine it and they already have like a good understanding of what it is. And then you add three new things so that it still feels really fresh. So I've been reading The Hunger Games to my son recently, and one of the things that Suzanne Collins uses for her rule of three is the tracker jackers. So these, if you haven't read it before, these are little creatures that are more or less like normal wasps. So when I say wasps, you have a picture in your mind, you know how they move, you know what they look like. But in her version, they are larger and have more poisonous venom. So basically, they're bigger and scarier. They're genetically engineered by the government and they can track people. So wherever you go, if they know that you're the one they're looking for, they can track you all over the place. And so with the tracker jacker, she takes something that's really familiar to people and twists it to make it make sense in her world. And so it adds a level of depth to something that's already familiar to the users or to the readers.
Definitely works as well, because I know that my fear of wasps has been exacerbated by those tracker jackers because they have stuck in my mind ever since I first read that.
I know, there's a terrifying scene in it when the tracker, you don't want to make an enemy of a tracker jacker.
No.
So we're just going to go straight into our first sprint right away. So what we're going to do just to warm ourselves up, this is just going to be a 5-minute sprint. Is we're going to pick a person, a place, or a thing in the real world, and then we're going to apply the rule of three to it. So you can choose anything you want. It can be a monster, it can be a god, it can be a bug, it can be your mom, you know, anything that you think would make sense. Change three things about it and describe how that changes the reader's experience of that person, place, or thing. Okay, everybody ready? I'm going to start our timer now. Thirty seconds left. Okay, how did everybody do? So if you want to share with everyone who's with us today, make sure you use the drop down and click from all panelists to all panelists and attendees, and then everyone can see. I like it. Okay, so Gary had an aircraft that can suspend flight and stay in the air. It can become invisible, and it can increase its speed beyond normal. Yeah, so then everyone has a picture of your airplane. It knows you don't have to fill in that much of the description, but adding that makes it quite different. I like it.
I love this dialogue from Wesley where we've kind of got almost like we've got a short history coming out here where sort of elephants have gone extinct and now they've sort of become, or they've been made, machines have been made into the image of elephants, and they can you know, make a lot of noise and also malfunction and destroy a whole building, which I think is great. But you can still get the same sort of picture of the size and the bulk and the way that could become threatening if it was made more sinister. I think that's great.
Yeah, I like it. We've got someone who's made a child so that they're telepathic and so that they exist outside of time and can be the host of his father's ghost. Ooh. I like it. Creepy. I think that people do that a lot with children because, you know, the image that you have in your mind of kids is very innocent and playful. And so then when you add those sort of creepy elements to it, you see it in horror movies and that sort of thing a lot because that juxtaposition is so jarring for your brain. It's quite impactful.
Absolutely. It's just going completely against what you expect, which is kind of what this rule is all about. It's sort of changing what you think is going to happen with the initial description, which is great. I'm loving the dolphins with telepathic abilities that Natalie suggested. They make friends with people and they use these friendships to their advantage, and I can see that they're the smartest. They're some of the smartest animals.
Yeah, weren't there telepathic dolphins in Galapagos? That's it. Yeah, I can't. Yeah, something along those lines. It was great. I loved it. Barbara says the capital, what was once Washington, D.C., is still the seat of the government, but for North, South, and Central America, because the world has been reshaped into the 5 continents for the governing bodies, and there are no longer countries. Like it, you have to apply to live there, and you have to be selected. And the capital is now domed over to protect it from all outside forces, natural and unnatural. And the air is cleaner there than anywhere else on Earth. I love it. So everybody understands that. Everyone can imagine that.
That last bit's quite sinister as well. It kind of speaks to a whole sort of like dystopian future, which maybe isn't too dystopian, but we won't go too deep to see.
Like the capital in the Hunger Games, you know, in Panem, that same sort of idea that there's a certain special place that people want to get into and can't get into, and what are the power dynamics around that. Great.
Annie's come up with a new version of honeysuckle, which can travel along the ground. Honey is poisonous and it can entangle itself around your legs to immobilize you. And it protects the one last apple tree left in the world, which again, like, there's a whole story coming out there. But I do love that because, like, honeysuckle is one of my favourite flowers. It's a lovely sort of smell on a summer breeze, but then now it's kind of poisonous and dangerous. And I love that sort of, it's again like that innocence that's turning into danger. It's great.
Yeah. Oh, these all sound really interesting. I like that you guys are commenting on each other's too. That's great. Oh no, Jonathan says a post-apocalyptic world where sports are gone due to viruses. That sounds slightly too close to home. So role-playing games are the new sports. VR of the role-playing is broadcast on the internet, and live commentary gets vicious about how people are playing the characters, their combat decisions, etc. Great, I love that, even though it feels slightly close to home at the moment.
I love that there's a whole mixture of kind of places, animal settings, people coming out here. It's great. Yeah. My comfy master is an evil man, trains only teenagers aged 15 to 17 in the midst of a dark forest in midnight. That's from Imari. Sorry for pronouncing your name wrong there.
There's loads of really nice ones here. Apologies if we haven't got to yours yet, but I'm worried that we better carry on or we won't get through all of these. It's amazing how fast it goes when we only do 3 short prompts. Thank you for everyone who shared. I appreciate it.
That's great.
Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is when you're world building and you borrow inspiration from other stories that already exist. Many successful fantasy and science fiction authors borrow from Greek or Roman mythology. I just read Cirque by Madeline Miller, which is all based around, you know, Zeus and Helios and all of these gods and mythology that you already know, but the story felt really fresh and was really deep into the character development, and it was incredible. And the world in that was as much a main character as any of the actual characters themselves.
I'm so excited to read that one. That's on my shelf.
Oh, it's great. Others use components from fairy tales and other stories to create new worlds. So if you say that there's elves in your world, or dragons, or trolls, or fairies, your reader already has a picture of what that's like. And again, you might want to change it, use your rule of three, make them your own, but it still allows your reader to recognize something and to be able to start filling in the setting on their own without having to describe every single little thing. So when you're world building, you don't always have to come up with something entirely new. You can adapt pieces from our world or from worlds that others have created and still feel exciting and different. Libby was saying that one of her favorite fictional worlds is Harry Potter and the Wizarding World. And there's a lot in that in Harry Potter that exists in the real world. You know, King's Cross Station, and a lot of it takes place around London, and the school feels very familiar, you know, aside from the fact that they wear robes and ride brooms. A lot of it is a school that would be familiar to a lot of British students, although maybe not in a castle. You know what I mean? Like the basics.
The houses and everything, yeah.
Yeah, and they're still studying for exams. They're still attending all their classes. So for our next sprint, what we're going to do is think about one element from an existing world. So this could be the real world now, or it could be your favorite one. Maybe it's Middle Earth, maybe it's space, but something that makes sense to you in your new world, and then add something new to it. Describe how that element fits into your world and how it could be it could affect the life of your characters in that world. Okay, ready, steady. 30 seconds left. Okay, great. A couple of people have already started sharing. Thank you for that. If anyone else wants to share theirs, there's some really interesting ideas already. Where's the one I was just looking at? Rotendo. In his world, you've only shared that with me, not with everyone, but in his world, songs are the death knells, and no one can sing. And his main protagonist walks like he's dancing and he's one rhyme away from a song. But if there's music, he starts peeling off his skin like he's sunburnt. And if music carries on, eventually everything starts to rot, and it's very painful. And I love that idea of things that bring joy in our world are somehow turned around. And even though this protagonist feels rhythm and feels like music should exist, the idea that then kills him is a really interesting juxtaposition. So interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, it's super vivid as well. I was just looking at Grace's, and she's kind of sort of used some, so like she's created like a creature of law that was popular in Asia, but where the mythology kind of doesn't quite give Grace all like what she needed for her story, she's then supplemented it with sort of Greek mythology, so there's a whole sort of mix in there. And I kind of love the idea that you've got this sort of group of creatures, let me try and pronounce this, the Viceribus, who are kind of living in secret in the human world, and they've actually set up a chain of funeral parlors because they need to sort of eat something from like dead humans in order to live, but they know that humans will come after them if they keep trying to eat the live ones, so they've been sort of smart there.
Yeah, and there's something really interesting and appealing about that you see a lot in fantasy and sci-fi about worlds that exist in secret alongside the world that we know. I was just thinking about Neil Gaiman's American Gods. That's one where, it's in our world, but there's this whole secret element, that exists exactly where we are, but where these gods are fighting with each other and having all of these interactions we don't even know about. Another one like that I loved is Haruki Murakami's Hard-Boiled Wonderland. I don't know if anyone else has read that, but it absolutely blew me away when I read it. It all takes place in Tokyo in this underground strange subway system, and it's a world that you understand, but then has all these amazing magical elements to it. So that's a really nice way to do it, to take something and make it so that and I guess the Harry Potter world is the same. It's this whole wizarding world that lives in secret next to us. Which makes you think, maybe there is a wizard living next door and you can't even tell because their house has been disappeared, or, something along those lines.
It's that urge that makes you think you're going to get the letter in your post, even when you're long past being 11. It's that sort of thing.
Because you could, maybe.
It's out there, so it could happen.
Okay, great. Natalie says in her world, through carbon dating, they've realized that an elaborate artifact is actually 15,000 years old and not made by humans. And so then that changes the whole way that you look at the past, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it makes you question every story that you've ever been told, all the history that you've ever read. How much of that is true and how much of it has it just gone off on the wrong tangent? What's the real truth? And then you want to dig in and investigate.
Yeah, right? And is it a cover-up, and do some people know? And yeah, absolutely. I kind of love, Jane's said that the weather and topography of the land are the two biggest elements that help to shape the people and events in her world. And I think it's always really interesting. I love when I've sort of read things where they've taken the land and you get these kind of real things like, oh, well, there's always storms over here, so these people live in this way, or there's drought here, so this is why this culture has been formed this way. And actually digging into how that happens and sort of writing that's really interesting.
Yeah. Let's see. So Catherine says television is invented and becomes prevalent much earlier in an alternate timeline. And so as a result, Venetia knows about Sicily's death without waiting for the mail to arrive in America. A suicide jump from the Empire State Building would be covered on TV news. That changes everything. If back in history, if television was there for all of those things that we knew about in history. Love that. I
love this one from, and I'm gonna say it's Neus or Neus. I'm not entirely sure. Sorry, but Medusa comes to life in our world. She covers her snakes with a turban and wears special sunglasses. She's studying how to turn non-living things into stone to get rid of all the garbage that is killing the planet. I love that Medusa is an environmental campaigner. It's great.
Why not? Somebody's got to come in and do something. And do something. LaShawn Robinson says that what if a cetus, is that how you say that? Or a kraken appears off of Florida. So I love the idea of everyone, all of those Floridians that you see in the news suddenly from their deck chairs see a kraken out to sea. And how does that change things? Something from Scottish folklore being put into contemporary Florida is a really interesting take on it.
Well, from D, here we've got Barogna is a sea witch. She can control the element of water to some degree, making storms rise and water spouts. She has power, but is easily manipulated by flattery, which could lead to all sorts of interesting things. Her insecurity makes her volatile, and she can be a formidable enemy if crossed. She craves sweets and can make a mean Afghan. The protagonist uses flattery to calm her in order to cross a large stormy bay. I think that is really interesting, because you can kind of it makes sort of these mythological sort of creatures and people a bit more human when you give them a defining trait that the protagonist can interact with and sort of manipulate.
Well, and how can you have a big, powerful sea witch who is also really insecure? I mean, that was a lot of the story of Cirque, is just, they're vulnerable people to their emotions, even though they're powerful gods. Susan, I love yours. It's really long, and I'm not going to read it out, but she's written a whole really interesting paragraph from a story about her daughter who disappears on her first day of school. It's great, Susan. I'm sure there's a lot of children that would make themselves disappear on their first day of school if they could manage it. Okay, shall we carry on? So our next prompt is going to be a bit longer. So sometimes when the idea of crafting an entire world, especially if you're starting from scratch and building without depending on other worlds as your starting point, it can be a bit overwhelming. So Haley's suggestion is that start small. So think about your world from your main character. What does it feel like to them? What does it look like? What does it smell like? What are they experiencing when it comes to that world? And then slowly zoom out a bit from that. And even if this is only to help you build it for your own understanding, because I think often that's a good starting point, is figuring out all of these elements for your world before you start writing anything. So our sprint is we're going to ask you to start really small and then zoom out. So the first thing we want you to do is describe your main character's room. So that room, that room might be on a spaceship, that room might be a small cottage in Middle Earth, wherever their room is. Describe that room, and then their house or wherever their room is, and then their neighborhood, the city. How does your character interact with each space? How does this space and that world affect them? How is their experience of that world and that space different from how something similar would affect us? So take a minute. Have a think about a character who you want to start with. And then we're going to start by describing the room and their house and their environment from small to big. Everybody ready? Start now. 30 seconds to go. Okay, everybody. So let us know, you're welcome to share your work as usual. What was challenging about this prompt? I saw that some people found it difficult because their world is so similar to the world as we know. What was her name? Grace. Grace is asking if there's ideas about how to make it richer, because there's only a few things that are different. She's the one where the humans eat other humans' viscera, but that everything is sort of normal. They have it harvested and delivered to their households and treat it like a normal occurrence. So yeah, how do you add power to the things that they do that are different to make your reader recognize it and also recognize the difference? Do you talk about how the viscera is harvested? What's that experience? Do you cook it in a certain way? What does it taste like? Talk about the taste of it, because that's going to be a very different experience for the people who are reading it. Think about those small little things that are different and that make your world different. How did everybody else find it? Did you find this a useful thing, or did you find it more difficult to start small and zoom out? There's lots of good ones here.
I really like Key's approach of sort of waking up into a room to kind of come into this way. So it's kind of the character is she's been kidnapped and she's in a room which seems like it's somewhat familiar, somewhat sort of foreign at the same time, and she's kind of, and her sight is slightly blurred as well, so she's kind of taking in details like the light. Like, we spend some time with the light in the description, and I think that kind of really helps root you in the character's perspective and like make you sort of feel like you're there with them and trying to figure out what kind of light it is. And yeah, I like focusing on that one sort of detail, to where that gives you a sense, to me, that gives me a sense that nothing's going to be certain. If light's not certain, then nothing is going to be certain.
Yeah, well, and actually what she's saying is that the things that she's experiencing, the light, can everyone see hers? Did she share it with everyone? What she's talking about is how suddenly she's woken up and the things feel familiar, and they haven't felt familiar for a long time. So suddenly she can see light that feels familiar to her, and she can hear a song that feels familiar to her from her childhood. But this is relevant because she hasn't had anything familiar for a long time while she's been captive. Yeah, so that's really interesting.
I like Jane's character's room. This kind of heavy curtains help to block out the sun to keep the bedroom cool in the heat of the summer. So that detail about the room tells us a bit more about the world outside as well. And it's going to have hot summers, and that's something that people have to respond to. Bed built into the wall, allowing for his large book collection. Manuscripts and quills and ink take up most of the room. Sort of the bed and the thing he needs to sleep and to live almost has been shoved to one side to make way for the books and the passion sort of thing. I like that detail a lot.
Yeah, well, and Jane says it got her thinking more about the structures, because she's been working on climate, topography, regions, but hadn't got to buildings and hadn't got to those smaller things. And some of those things are the things that I think feel most evocative to your reader. It's, the tastes and the smells and the feeling of, sheets on the bed, and those sorts of things are going to really sort of touch your reader and make them remember things from their own life and evoke emotion. Yeah, so it's good to go small instead of just big, because sometimes big can be slightly intellectual, whereas small can be more emotional.
Barbara says, sorry, but
I was just going to say, Catherine says it's challenging because her work in progress is set in our world, but in an alternate timeline. So she ended up describing her protagonist's country house, which in our timeline had been ruined in the war, but in this alternate timeline was still in good shape. But it's interesting. And she says it wasn't easy because she kept wanting to do more research and think more about what was in there. And stop writing and just think it through. Yeah, I think that's true. I think someone else was writing about multiple timelines too, which is really, really interesting if you get it right. It's really hard to do, to figure out how to make timelines make sense, but it's amazing if you can do it.
Yeah, I think where Barbara has said that sort of not much has changed in her world except technology. Yeah, I think, again, thinking about those small things that you could make kind of slightly different, slightly surprising, are sort of good to kind of draw the reader in further. Because I know when I'm reading, if something sort of, I'm expecting something and then it's different to what I expected, that makes me want to learn more about it. And I think it's just quite fun to kind of think about these things. I had a good time writing mine, just kind of like trying to just think, well, how can I make this different? And actually there's no limits because it's just what you can come up with. So it's great.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, there's a lot here. There's a lot of really interesting ones. You know, saying that nothing's changed except technology is, I mean, technology has such a massive impact on our lives now. If you think about, you know, when I was in university, you know, the whole first 20 years of my life, I didn't have an email address, and I certainly didn't have a smartphone. We didn't really have much of a computer at our house. I mean, and now every aspect of my life, from work to childcare to everything, has a technological element to it. So, you know, don't forget about, or don't play down how much a change in technology can absolutely change the course of your world.
Definitely.
Cynthia says she thinks Small to Big is an excellent tool to practice with and master, and she likes it. Great, thanks. Oh, a couple of people have got to run. No problem. We're coming to the end of our time, so if you need to run, no problem. What are a couple of the other ones here?
Randall's, I love the little detail of, the bedroom is small, what was once considered master bedroom size space in 1904 when the house was built. Wood floorboards that creak if looked at the wrong way, kind of little details like that, things that give the space character. Light comes in from a single window. It's nice because it has a west facing window, so the sunsets are wonderful, but she's never in the bedroom to appreciate the sunsets because she's always in another part of the house with her mother. So those things that the character can't see, but you're still getting sort of a privileged insight into, I think it really sort of makes you sort of think both about the space where the character is and the space where the character isn't. It's a really good
and already I have a sense of loss, a sense of sacrifice, that she's given up those sunsets in order to help her mother, whether voluntarily or not, we don't know yet, but yeah, it's interesting. Okay. Oh, there's so many, so hard to know where to go. Okay, this is great.
Rutendo is saying that the room was the most challenging to create, and I can kind of see, I'm sort of wondering whether that's because it's maybe the most personal and you've kind of got to sometimes you've got to infuse a personality into a room and into a space, and it's quite hard to think about those things. I know I was finding that difficult as well.
Yeah. Natalie says her MC is a military child who moved around a lot growing up, and at the moment her room is a sleeping berth in a mobile lab, which is a large trailer combining living and working spaces for a group of archaeologists. And it's parked across from the excavation site, so that's moving further out, and you can see it in a tunnel in an ice-covered mountain. And there's no settlements to speak of for hundreds of miles. So then we've gone further out, we're looking further afield, and actually it's empty. There's only more mountains and a frozen sea. And there's such a sense of bleakness, even in, you know, that's 3 sentences. And I have such a sense of the bleakness and loneliness of where this child lives. Who does she hang out with, or he? Yeah, great. That's a great example of each sentence moving further out and building it that way. Great. Anybody else want to comment on some of their favorite worlds and what they're going to go next now that they've taken these steps of building and moving out? What's your next step going to be? I think the further that you can go, the wider, the more in depth you can go, and the wider you can go, the more rich your world is going to be. Okay, and I think that's it, unless anyone has any other comments. Nikki says their manuscript is set in China. An American expat adjusts to communism and the notion that eyes are always on her. Seeing the oppression and desolation in the eyes of the people she meets has enough of an impact on her comparison to life in the US. From foods, entertainment patterns, and religious freedoms, she looks behind the eyes of a child that is kidnapped and falls into the underworld of trafficking, but then discovers an underground tunnel system running under Nanjing and through the southern China. Oh, so that's interesting in itself. So then you've got both a world that's realistic and foreign because you're an American in China, and then if you add another element of finding an underground tunnel system that she can find, in my imagination, she is going to use it to escape from the trafficking that she's been kidnapped and brought into. And so there's two levels of it being both foreign in a realistic way and foreign in a fictional way are always going to be really interesting. That's a bit like Haruki Murakami's. Jane says her next step is taking each region and concentrating on the people now that she has the topography gone. Yeah, great. If there's a lot of different regional elements, then you can go sort of zoom in on each of them and then out again and then zoom in on the next and figure out how to make a bit of a tapestry.
I love how many people have said that they've sort of found it useful and they've found it sort of, a good way to get into thinking about these things. Elizabeth was asking if you'll be able to find recordings after the session, and you'll get a link to a recording sent to you because you were registered for this session, just to answer that question for everyone else as well.
Yeah, we'll get something out to you tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and Randall's right. The next step is to finish the work in progress. You just have to keep writing, but it's so nice that all of you come along and spend a bit of time and take our little bits that we give you and run with them in all these amazing different directions. LaShawn says, will there be any more sessions? Yes, this is a monthly session, so you can come back every month. Haley and me and Libby variations of us will be here each month, and we have a different topic that we look at. I can't remember off the top of my head what the topic is for next time round. But we always start with a bit of training, just a bit of technique, and then we go into the prompts like this. So thank you so much for everyone for coming, and thank you everyone for your thank yous. It's really fun. We started doing this about 4 months ago, and we just can't get enough of it. It's great. We love that everybody comes along. So thank you again, everyone, for coming. And yeah, put it in your calendars. We'll see you the fourth Tuesday of every month. We'll be here. And I think now that you've signed up, you'll get a little reminder each month. So we'll see you soon. Thanks again for coming.